What's up, everybody? This is the People Man Talks podcast, and I'm your host, Emanuel Solomon, the People Man, with Emanuel Solomon Training and Coaching. I'm an interpersonal skills coach that helps high-performing professionals of color to promote and reposition through increasing their cultural, emotional intelligence. I have a passion for working with professionals of color, helping them to reach their greatest potential, while at the same time dismantling systems of whiteness that render people of color paralyzed, neutralized, and mesmerized in the process. So you can go to my website, emmanuelsolomon.com, to get more information, more content, more resources. And if you go to my website right now, I've got a free gift for you. And I said free, a free gift for you, a free training, free interpersonal skills training. If you go to emanuelsolomon.com, if you're a high-performing professional of color, go there and check me out there. This is the People Man Talks podcast, and I have a special guest with me today, a friend of mine, a deep thinker. His name is Sean Woodard, okay? He's an HR director for Multnomah Education. He has over 17 years of human resource experience. He's a leader, he's a deep thinker, and a human resources professional. Please, everybody, welcome Sean Woodard to the People Man Talks podcast. How you doing, bro?
Hey, man, I'm doing pretty good. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Man, I am too. I felt like this was a long time coming. We did a little snip here and there in the past, but I needed to get you here on the show because I really wanted professionals of color that are really looking to advance to get that inside view of human resources and how it works, and also, you know, what you do and why that's important to them. And so, like, one thing that some people don't know about me is that I actually have experience in HR. So, you know, I got a foundational piece of what it looks like on the inside, you know, and I just wanted to kind of bounce thoughts and questions off of you because you have a lot more experience in that area, but I think we can really provide value to our viewers. So, man, tell us a little bit about what you do as an HR director.
Yeah, so I've got a team of about 8 people, and just kind of generally speaking, from the kinds of categories that we handle, it's like general employee relations, labor relations, which is working with our unions, our labor associations. We've got 2 of them at MESD. I'm responsible for payroll and benefits administration in our agency. We've got about 700 employees.
Okay.
And employee wellness, right? So looking at the employee from a holistic standpoint, you know, offering ways for them to kind of understand work-life balance and, you know, succeed professionally in the work environment while juggling complex, you know, home life environments, you know, none more than the time period that we're in right now, right?
Yeah.
So employee wellness is an area inside of human resources that has really taken off in the last probably 5 years or so.
That's interesting. I mean, would that department kind of take care of, like, somebody needed I don't know, some mindfulness techniques or some you know, extra exercise stipends or something to be able to go and work out during the day so that they're not over swamped, or, you know, things like that?
See, showing off that HR knowledge, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know? You know, number one in wellness is mindfulness. You know, it's the ability to stay focused and be clear-headed and stay calm and understanding your body and how it works and why it's working and doing the things that it's doing.
Yeah.
And give people tips and stuff like that. Typically, you talk about meditation. That starts, you know, progressing over into things like yoga practices and nutrition and how to eat right and, you know, controlling your weight and diet and that sort of stuff. Those are all things that go inside of employee wellness. And then you get more traditional things like around time management,
Okay.
organizational skills,
Okay.
you know, things like that. Support groups, affinity groups, things like that.
Some of the smaller private companies, they had a lot more flexibility because they didn't have as many rules that they had to adhere to. Because when I was working in HR, it was through the county. So, we had lots and lots of rules and compliance and things that we had to do on different levels, whether it's a state level, government level, labor level. There were a lot of different rules that kind of went into that. And sometimes those rules can protect you, but, sometimes those rules also can be barriers to you in entry. But in private, there's barriers to entry as well, because there's a lot of ways to get around these rules, because they don't have as many, and employers, supervisors can kind of finagle the system either way. And I think that becomes a barrier sometimes for professionals of color within that. Can you talk a little bit about the fact that some of these employment specialists can get around what we would consider fair hiring practices to getting people?
Well, yeah, yeah, sure. Let me say what I think everybody probably knows, right? What's the number one way to get a job? I mean, it's connections. It's who you know, right? And in the worst of times, that's called nepotism, right? You'll just hire all your family members and you'll hire your friends. And sure, in a small business, mom and pop business, local pizzeria, local bakery, local salon, local barbershop, that works just fine. As you start to get into the bigger companies, certainly government agencies, there are rules against nepotism, right? You can't hire your friends, you can't hire your family. There's a lot of rules around it, like you said, particularly like around preferences for veterans or disabled veterans. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of laws preventing discrimination against people of color or people with different religious backgrounds, sexual orientation, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And in the government, in the public sector, like you were saying, there are more rules, more transparency required, because those organizations have to show what's called a competitive process. So they typically have to do a public posting and a public scrutiny. They have to document their assessments and interviewing process and their selection, because all that information is public record.
Right.
So you technically, sorry, go ahead.
And you get audited, and I remember that, your processes get audited regularly. So,
And
they can look back and say, like, okay, when this person files a grievance and then you didn't necessarily go through all your steps in the order that you were supposed to, you can, as a HR supervisor or in management, and it didn't go correct, you can get reprimanded for stuff like that. And in private, like, in some of these other ones, they can basically sometimes advertise for a posting and know that they're going to hire who they're going to hire before, but they need to advertise it, and they still hire the person that they were going to hire before, but they had to at least advertise that posting. So sometimes, you know, um, people of color are frustrated and get frustrated. I've been through that process, and they're like, "Man, what happened? Like, why didn't they go that way?" And then you ask a question because you want to know. You want to know, like, okay, well, what happened? Why was I not hired? And then you end up uh, feeling like you're the angry person. A lot of time they don't go through the proper procedures, and they don't have to tell you. you know.
that's true all across the board right now. And I mean, as sort of, suing people and suing agencies has become more of a thing over the last 10, 15 years or whatever. A lot of companies are posting jobs, even though they have someone identified who they want to have, who they want to take the position,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then if you infuse the momentum around equity and the requirements around equity, what you just said, it becomes a bigger point of frustration for candidates of color, because now you've got companies advertising, promoting, and actively recruiting candidates of color. And a lot of times, if you want to be cynical, their main focus is around having candidates of color in the pool, in the applicant pool.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't mean you get selected.
Right.
right? Because selection of candidates of color has a lot of rules around it. You know, if you remember affirmative action, even in the college admissions settings, that got a lot of controversy around it. Reverse racism was a idiotic phrase that was thrown around for a little while,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just something to be mindful of. Is trying, and it's difficult to know when you're on the outside of an agency to know what's a bona fide recruitment and when an agency is actually looking for diversity, different people of color, different backgrounds, age diversity, so on and so forth, gender diversity, and when it's lip service.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that's the challenge that we face, and we faced it for a long time. We're going to continue to face it, and that's where the word of mouth comes in, right? In our communities, we start to do word of mouth around these agencies that we feel are just paying lip service to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and which are serious about it. A lot of times you can tell by who's currently involved in the agency and the hiring process, and then the
That
outcomes.
leadership basically is what you're saying. Like you can sometimes you can tell by understanding who are in positions of leadership whether they're really serious about diversity, about
Yeah,
equity.
yeah, and ideally you would see people of color in those positions, right?
Right.
And if they're not there, the people who are there are really, you know, walking the talk. They're in the community. They're trying to liaise with community leaders and community members. And you know, when you see that, and you have some people in the community who can vouch for them and say, "No, this is a legit thing, Emmanuel. I think you should actually go apply," and at least you feel like you got a fair shot, a decent shot, whether you win or not. At least you feel like you got a fair shot versus, you know, I was there for the stats to make it look good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel like sometimes, some of the areas that I saw in HR that really troubled me were one, barriers to entry, right? Like barriers to us getting our applications to the right people, to score high enough on the applications to get to the interview process. So there was a lot of like front end issues that I saw, and I was able to kind of help and coach some applicants through that process. And they're like, "Oh, that's all I had to do," but they wouldn't have known that if I wasn't there, or so this perspective that you have already of being an HR professional provides an advantage, in how you compete, because really, this competitive process is lopsided as far as us being able to compete in general, right? I think a lot of Black and brown folks, professionals of color, I mean, they're getting the short end of the stick most of the time, even when they do get the job. And I think it's important that we understand the processes, what's going on, how people are thinking, so that we can adjust how we navigate. Does that make sense?
You know, it does. And so you let me know where you want to go, because we can talk about the process, right? I can just lay it out in some steps for you really quickly, but it's all in the nuances, right? I mean, the processes are pretty direct, right? You see a posting, you apply to it, you submit your resume, you submit your cover letter, you know, you submit your references, you play the waiting game. On the back end of that, someone's reviewing and scrutinizing those resumes and applications, um, directly to the job description, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, just let me just do it first, and I'll circle back.
Mm-hmm.
A number of people will get invited in, right, to an interview. And the most conservative processes, 3 people will get invited in. Some other times you'll see 6, 7 people get invited in. There might be 1 or 2 rounds. Most people are doing panel interviews right now, so you'll sit in front of 3 people, sometimes in front of 6 or 7 or 8 people, and they're an hour long, and you get 1 question per person, and you just gotta, you know, answer the questions to the best of your ability. then you play the waiting game again, and you get an email or a phone call that says, congratulations, or I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, a lot of nuances in that, right? You go back to the resume in the cover letter submission. You know, we know about bias, we know about unconscious bias, we know about overt bias. You know, it all starts with screening people by their name and their affiliations and things like that. Some of that stuff we can control or choose not to control. What some research is called like the whiteification of your resume,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a personal choice. And there's research on people who started not showing as much of their affinities groups, whether they were in a sorority, a black fraternity, or a black sorority, and leaving that off of their resume.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a good debate right now whether that's helpful or hurtful. I think ultimately you have to know the culture of the agency that you're applying for, that you're applying to, and you know, a little bit is, if you have inside knowledge, great. Some of it is hope for the best. Same thing with agencies that you volunteer for. You know, like in the Portland area, there's things like, you know, if you're at SEI, for example, or the Boys and Girls Club on MOK or the Matt Dishman Center, those things start to indicate to people perhaps what your background is. Sorry if you're hearing that.
No, you're fine.
Updates coming in on my computer. I apologize.
So, you know, one thing that I was seeing, or one thing that I was hearing from you was, you talked about really understanding whether or not you can have certain criteria in your resume, whether it's going to be helpful or could be harmful to your resume. But you know, I go a little bit deeper. You know, and I don't need to be as politically correct because this is my business. This is Emanuel Solomon Training and Coaching. This is the People Man Talks podcast. I'm Black unapologetically, and I have to speak this way because we're always being conditioned and being fashioned into a certain type of speak or speech in order to cater to our a white demographic, to whiteness in general. And I refuse to do that. You have to know whiteness. You have to understand whiteness. And what I mean by whiteness is my definition of whiteness is this. One, you have to be non-melanated, and two, you have to uphold the systems of white supremacy, either consciously or subconsciously. These are the criteria that I use for whiteness. And I've talked about this before in a lot of different arenas, which is that I believe that you can positionally be white, but not be white. In my definition, you can be Irish, Italian, German, and not be white if you consciously or subconsciously do not uphold the systems of white supremacy. And so I know that's not, you know, the majority, but I try to make sure I'm clear with that. And so when I'm using terms, I'll say like Caucasian when I'm speaking of non-melanated people. And when I'm talking about white, I'm talking about those non-melanated people who uphold the systems of white supremacy, either consciously or subconsciously. And whiteness is kind of that essence. And so you have to understand whiteness as a professional of color. And I think that when we don't, it really hurts our ability to advance, promote. It hurts our ability to be able to navigate, negotiate, say what we need and what we want. And so, you know, all this really is understanding that when you want to play within the system, there are some rules of engagement. And you're talking about some of these rules, some of these unsaid things. We're talking about bias. But really, I believe that when you're already in a position of power, in the social position of power, that's whiteness, when you actually act in a biased way, it's racist. I think the whole bias with power, to me, is where the isms come. you know, because we all have bias and you can't really avoid that. It's just a part of who we are. But when those biases come in the form of whiteness, it's typically in the form of control, destruction, or domination of non-white people. We're not surprised, you know, we're not bamboozled when we're not, you know, our application doesn't turn up or whatever the case is. Because sometimes you might have to go outside of the system. You might have to consult. You might have to do some other things, because some industries, some organizations, some companies are not going to be a great fit for you in your career, just based off of how they, you know, do their hiring practices.
Yeah, I mean, and to what you're saying is, you know, and the way I was characterizing it, I don't think it's dissimilar to what you're saying is we're all in choice to some degree, right? When it comes to blackness, a certain race, asserting culture
Mm-hmm.
in the face of white dominant culture, especially because the context of our conversation so far is around the work environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can choose and you have to choose, and this is the dilemma that we face, and the challenge that we face is where you are on that spectrum and how you want to show up on that spectrum. And some of it comes with confidence and self-knowledge, and maybe that comes with age, maybe that comes with your upbringing, how your parents brought you up, how your family brought you up. But you're all in choice. We're all in choice. And sometimes, let's say we go to the more extremes of the spectrum in the work environment,
Mm-hmm.
it fits and works perfectly for some people. They show up 100% black and they assert their blackness, and it works. They get accepted and promoted, and they're in leadership powers, and they become sort of a beacon, and other people of color are like, man, I admire that, and I wish I could model that, or you know what I'm trying to say? Other people show up with their innate blackness and they are discriminated against. And there's, you know, you and I could spend hours trying to figure out the difference, you know, but we're trying to get into the mind of racists and trying to understand their thinking. You know, for example, Colin Kaepernick, right? I mean, if he made a choice, he's in a work environment. His employers decided they didn't like his assertion of his culture.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the results. And there are other people, you can look at other sports arenas, you can look at the music arena, but then you come down into non-celebrity status, the same thing as an HR director or an HR specialist or an admin person or a custodian. It doesn't matter. If you want to walk in the door, you have to decide how you show up. And there's no person can tell you how you should show up. You know what I mean? And we deal with the additional scrutiny of, you know, for one, I show up as a black professional of color. I'm navigating whiteness, and I have to decide how I want to show up. The older I've gotten and the more experience that I have, the less time I spend in that space, because I've gotten my credentials, I've gotten my footing underneath me, and I'm a little bit more on the spectrum of I'm going to show up more to my true self. However that lands on people, that's up to them. You know, but that's something that individuals have to choose. And, you know, whether you're 20, 25, 30, 45, 50, and it, like I said before, it depends on the culture of the agency that you're applying to, your comfort level with yourself, your comfort level inside of your skin. You and I talk a lot about learning yourself and knowing yourself, how you can go about doing that, learning your culture, understanding your culture. I think the undertone here, real quick, Emanuel, is, you know, we're not a monolithic group, Black people, right? If I grew up on the East Coast, right? Born in Massachusetts, raised in Connecticut, right? Not the blackest of places to be. It ain't Houston, New Orleans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Family in the South. And a lot of times I understand my progression compared to my cousins from Florida is just by dialect. That's just regional dialect. If that makes any sense,
Now,
right?
you gotta go deeper on that. So what do you mean?
So people say, you know, whether I have an accent or not. I don't have an accent. Like, I have an East Coast accent now that I live on the West Coast. But my New York friends have much more of an accent than I do in the diction, the, um, the syntax that they use is different. Now,
Mm-hmm.
my relatives in St. Augustine, Florida, and Jacksonville, Florida, and Miami, Florida, very different,
Right, right. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And they show up in white spaces, is particularly when they leave their region, they got a tougher time.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? So, like, a Black Southern dialect isn't as romanticized as a white Southern dialect.
Mm-hmm.
So, what our Southern dialects, you know, and I learned this moving to the West Coast. You look at people who grow up in like California, like Oakland, California, or Compton, and they've got their dialect. That doesn't immediately show up as a romanticized notion in white America,
Right,
right?
right.
So you have to then be more particular about where you land professionally and how you show up professionally and what agencies you choose to apply to and then therefore get accepted to, right? So that, so what I'm saying is I grew up in Connecticut. I understand how I sound because I've been fighting that all my life. I've been in fist fights because of it, right? With my own people. Because you go down south, we go down south every summer to go visit the relatives and they say, oh, you talk white. You know, so those kinds of things are how they show up. And then I have to own how I show up as a professional of color. Those are the nuances that we face in these kind of application processes and these selection processes and these interview processes. And, you know, working with a person like you get the feedback and you get to understand how you show up when you have a coach who can show that back to you, or you do some own self-discovery and things like that, self-exploration and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think that in response to that, I think that at least with my program, that the areas that I believe that we can use as professionals of color to navigate these situations are understanding ourselves and then understanding people skills. And if you can understand yourself well and understand people skills, and what I mean by understanding yourself, I mean your culture, your awareness of self, awareness of culture, and your social environment. If you can really start to master that area, then when we talk people skills, it will be a lot more easy for you to navigate and for you to be unapologetically who you are. And a lot of times, um, those same people with those funny dialects, when they understand who they are and they understand how to position themselves and have the people skills to do that, even if they do have that dialect, they can they can advance and they can promote. And I've seen countless examples of that with folks from down south who still know how to connect with others, who still know how to communicate well with others, who still understand who they are. I've seen examples of those folks that continue to still show up unapologetic and advance in their career. And I know that does have to do with a lot of factors, but I don't believe it has to be one or the other. As far as either you either you don't show up authentically who you are, um, or you have to do some subversion of yourself, depending on.
But let me just say, I understand that developing that skill is a process.
Mm-hmm.
It is a process. And again, this is where choice comes in, because you have to decide if you want to play the game or play a game or not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe it's to kind of fake it till you make it. Maybe that's not quite what I'm advocating for, or not what I'm saying. But I'm not saying, when in my early career, I didn't show up always my full self. I can't even say that I today show up as my full self.
Mm-hmm.
More often I do, and I'm closer to showing up as my full self than ever before, right? But if someone's listening to this and they're not there yet, that's a process,
Right, right. It's
you
not
know.
overnight. Yeah.
And because we do work inside of a system with racist tendencies, there is a danger to telling people to just go out and be your full self. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't want to give any misgivings. Man, I wish we all could be Emanuel. I wish we all could just be 100% our true self. But you got to know there's consequences to that.
Yeah. Muhammad
You
Ali
know?
faced some of those consequences, but you can still take at least my belief is you can still take that approach based off of your core values and your systems, and you can still advance, you can still promote, you can still get the high paid positions. You just might have to negotiate or navigate your career a little different than somebody else, and how that shows up might be different for you, and you might go through a little pain, you might go through a little more consequence in the process, but but I think it's worth it, because when you are a person who um, is stifling that inner self for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, um, it just continues to show up. It shows up in high blood pressure. It shows up in hypertension. It shows up um, in being angry, being confused. People are going through their careers on with the worst possible emotions, because they're not able to be themselves, and they don't know how to be themselves, and they haven't developed themselves in such a way in order to do that. And it takes work, and it takes a little bit more work, I think, because we're in a social position uh, that that deems it uh, necessary that we even have to go through these obstacles in order to be ourselves. Like who has to fight to be themselves? Well, we do. And now we have to fight to be ourselves, but we also have to fight through increasing our skill with people and understanding how people work and understanding how people think, because that's actually what white supremacy does, is it preys on the fact that we don't know ourselves well. We don't know people well enough, and that's how they market to us and keep us controlled and that kind of thing. But I know I kind of went off on a tangent here. I know, but I think it's good that we're having this conversation, because um, how we show up determines how we feel about ourselves, our self-image, and if we can't show up in authentic ways, then it stifles our ability to produce. We're still on that, like we could still, maybe we're better than most of the people that we're around, but we're still not hitting that ceiling, because we're not able to be authentically ourselves. And once we can get to that place, our production is going to go through the roof. I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on, right? And then this conversation, I think you said you took a detour, but I think it's still certainly relevant to what we're saying, because it starts with the resume, right? The resume is the way you show yourself in the initial phase to the employer.
Mm-hmm.
And you then are in choice of how you're showing up on that resume.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was getting at before with, I can choose what I want to put down on this resume. Of course, I'm not going to send a 5-page resume, so I'm not going to list everything, every accomplishment, every association. So I have to pick and choose what I want to show, and I am painting a picture of myself
Mm-hmm.
in that resume.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then if I'm fortunate enough to get invited in for an interview, I certainly am, and I'm really conscious about how I'm showing up, down to the shirt I choose to put on, or the,
Mm-hmm.
let's just say the outfit I choose to put on,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I know, women of color, because there's more factors involved, have
Yeah.
more decision-making points in how you're going to show up, And then, as I was trying to say, is, trust me, I'm on a lot of interview panels, and I sit and I listen to a lot of people debrief. And the things that they look at are, they're not, it's very interesting how, man, sameness loves sameness.
Tell them these interview panels, because I've been on plenty of them, and tell me the ridiculousness. Like, oh, I didn't like her how she said da, 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 da. It has nothing to do with the job itself. It's just, but go ahead.
You're right, because this is what I would coach people on. It's some things that seem ridiculous, right? Like, did you take notes or didn't you take notes? Did you have a pen? Did you not have a pen? How they said a certain thing? Did you misuse a word? Did you not misuse a word? That sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes getting comfortable and slipping into our relaxed, this is back to dialects again, is what I was trying to say. But even in the content of the answers, sometimes that stuff gets scrutiny, and it shows up in where you weren't a good fit, which is just, a label for you just never really understand what that truly means. And certainly if anyone's never gotten a job or was not chosen for a position, you've probably heard that phrase before.
Heard it too many times. Yeah.
But you're right. Let's go back to being more proactive. I think it's, if you know yourself and you're confident and you're comfortable, then you have to learn and be really choosy about the agencies and the employer that you are marketing yourself to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you're just using that kind of like, I'm going to just put as many of this out there. And I understand desperation, right? Because if you just need a job and you need some income coming in, you got to do what you got to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if you are in a more strategic and selective position, which is ideal, then you want to research these companies and decide, is this a place where you can be more authentic and you can provide value, show value, and your value will be recognized and rewarded, monetarily and otherwise, because that's why we're in this game. You know what I mean? The work environment game. Certainly,
yeah,
if you're aligned with your life's mission, that's number one. Like, if I do human resources, I enjoy working with people. I enjoy solving problems and removing barriers. I work in the education space because that's where my life's work aligns, right? Therefore, I can deal with the challenges that come along a little bit easier. So you have to know what your life's work is all about.
You have to know you have to know why you made those decisions, what you're passionate about, why you're passionate about it. I think a lot of people don't take the time to really do that. And professionals of color, it seems like we're under a lot more pressure anyway, and the world in general is moving faster. You know what I mean? Like, we're going from 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5. Um, uh, so it's not just with black and brown folks, but the whole world, at least in the United States, is just moving faster, and more of our energy and more of our mental energy is being used up, and so it becomes a challenge to do what you're doing, which is understanding who you are and taking time to write out and script and write out your core values and what you believe in. But it's necessary. I can't really stress that point enough. It's like, yeah, I understand you're stressed. I understand you don't have enough time, and then you got to go back and you got kids and you've got all these other things. But it's your life on the line. It's your physical life on the line. Taking the time to really find out who you are and what makes you tick, what environments are best for you, understanding you on a deep level. These are things that are necessary. And I think, like with you, you're in a leadership position, so you're almost forced, in certain ways to look at yourself on a more um, intricate level, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, certainly if I want to be effective, right? And then if you talk about promoting and ensuring equity in the work that I do, I really have to be on my game. I have to be mentally sharp, because the system is really sophisticated and it's hard to dismantle it, it's not just sitting there waiting for you to just dismantle it. So you really have to be lock solid and razor sharp in order to recognize it when it's happening. Even if it isn't directed at you, I know it's directed at a group of employees or candidates that are out there, you know. But going back to just talk about like, how do you do it, right? The how, you know, for me, past and present mentors is super important, right? Like understanding what's informing your thinking processes, your belief systems, things you're willing to compromise on, things you're not willing to compromise on. You know, for me, I'm big on Martin Luther King, big on Dr. King, big on Nelson Mandela. You know, I remember back when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, came to New York. You know, that was a big deal for us to go to. I remember Bishop Desmond Tutu was a big name at the time. I kind of really gravitated towards that line of thinking. I did grow up with a single mom who was affiliated with the Black Panthers. So I read on Huey Newton, Stokely Carmichael, and you know, blending those two kind of radical and more peaceful belief systems together informs my identity. Now, I grew up with a single mother, two brothers. We went anywhere from being dirt poor to relatively poor. And my mother was uncompromising, you know, and we're talking like late 60s, 70s. I can only imagine how much more difficult it was for her. But, you know, she would pack us up and move if she felt like she was being mistreated by her white employers, which as a Black woman was pretty much regular. You know, she was a secretary. She was a secretary. So I can only imagine the amount of devaluing and maybe even sexual harassment and things that she must have dealt with. And she would, you know, we'd be in Massachusetts. She said, we're leaving, we're going to Florida. And we'd go to Florida and we'd spend 2 years down there. And she said, okay, we're leaving, we're going back to Connecticut, going back to Massachusetts. And as we got older, started asking questions, you know, you understood. And she would tell us straight up, you don't, there were some things she would not compromise on. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because it informs me today as a professional. I know I have to compromise from time to time. There's some things I'm not going to compromise on. And you have to be willing to lay some things on the line, maybe everything on the line for certain things. And if that's identity, if that's racial identity, that's gender identity, religious identity, or some intersection of all those things, then you got to be willing to do that. But you have to know that, right? I don't just wake up frustrated. That it's a culmination of things, and then I'm making conscious decisions along the way based on all the things in my life, my mother, my aunts, my uncles, my grandmother, you know, all those influences. I'm very much constantly aware of, you know, Jim Crow, the modern way racism shows up in our society, how that shows up in the workplace. And yeah, now I'm a person in a leadership position. I'm not promoting that. I'm not perpetuating that. I'm in the system, so somebody could argue that if you want to go really extreme, but I'm in the system and I'm being ever conscious and ever mindful about those things. And I went on detour too, but the point was, how do you develop that world view and that life view that's informing you and how you show up? Where do you get the information from? And for me personally, it's not social media. I can't do that. I can't allow my worldview to be informed by social media. It's an entertainment platform, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Those are entertainment platforms. And man, if you're using that to inform your worldview, you probably should pause and rethink that.
Now, you talked about like your mentors. You talked about like those folks, like having other perspectives, people maybe that have done what you want to do, or have done other things on a high level, and using that to kind of counter or add layers to your own thinking. That's huge. I mean, getting other perspectives are necessary for growth. And for me, I've always had a mentor or mentors. I've always had coaches, people that, you know, have worked with me to get to that next level, whether it be spiritually or whether it be financially, whether it be my business, whether my health. People are so important, man. I mean, I was just talking to somebody the other day about relationships and how relationships mean everything. Like, we're one relationship away from changing our life. People are everything, and that value of people, really valuing people, and that includes yourself first, and then others. That's the approach, I believe, that will help us to be able to connect with others and be able to advance and move to that next level. So, what have people skills, your people skills? How has that influenced your ability to navigate your career?
I mean, it's everything, right? I think the technical body of knowledge that it takes to do a job is probably like 20% of what's required. There's a lot of people who know the rules around HR,
Mm-hmm.
the rules, the policy. Everybody can read, you know what I mean? Like at this professional level, you
Yeah.
can read the
Yeah.
contract.
Yeah.
You can't read the person sitting across the table from you, you're not going to be successful.